guess Jim decided he didn't want to be like everybody else, you know. There is that too. Okay, really good. It's good to see everyone out this morning again, and again we're going to be starting a series here. There's a lesson that the ladies have been covering in their Bible studies that they're having together on the Wednesday nights when we're having our men's study. And some questions have been brought up to me about some of the traditions that we have here in this country. And instead of addressing it from the standpoint of just jumping right into it, I want to do some background. Some of the things that we do sometimes is we can see the issues that many other people have with their doctrine or their teaching and their practices, but sometimes we never use the exact same measurement to see whether what we're doing is right or wrong. And so what we did is we decided a long time ago to talk, everything that nobody wants to talk about, those are the things that we're going to talk about. And then let the Bible show us what the Bible says, what God says about a certain subject, and then leave it at that. You know, the reason we actually took a long time before when we studied, for example, even the singing or music and worship, we did something that nobody else I ever knew of ever did. We went back, we read every single verse in the Bible, Old and New Testament, on that subject. And we learned something that many people never talk about. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about a subject that this is probably one of the most controversial subjects that nobody ever wants to talk about in the scripture. I think this is even above, this one causes more issue even than the subject of money. And what I need us to understand is this is not Brother Hal's words. I want you to get you in contact with what God has actually said. So let me ask you a question. Not for my wife, I'm not going to let my wife answer this question. What is the one subject that the Bible talks about more than any other subject combined? If there's one subject that is covered more in the Bible than any other subject. Does anybody know what that is?
Idolatry.
Who said it?
Idolatry.
Idolatry. You know, the Bible talks more about idolatry than it talks about heaven and hell and repentance and confession combined. And we never talk about this subject. The only time we talk about this subject of idolatry is we want to talk about the prophets of Baal and the prophet Elijah. We never want to talk about this subject, idolatry. Or we want to say, that covetousness is idolatry. We always want to relate it to like money. And yet, many times we have no idea what the Bible actually says concerning idolatry. And so what we have to do is we have to go back, just like with any other subject. You cannot let me or any man, or even a dictionary, define idolatry. You got to let God define what he meant by idolatry. And then let the chips fall where they lay. Now, this is one of those subjects that when I went back to go look at some of these things, it got brought to my attention years ago as a young man. And when I went back and I looked at it, just scratching the surface, I realized there's a huge issue here. And many times when we even in this country, we want to use terms, politically speaking, even inside the church, we say conservative and liberal. You know, you got the liberal churches or the conservative churches. And I like to say, look, either you're the church or you're not. Let's stop putting labels there that the Bible said nothing about. But I find even using those definitions, the way we use those definitions, even the most conservative churches are very liberal when it comes to this subject. And I want to make sure we understand what God has said. Now, my whole goal is not to upset anybody. But you see, what you have to understand, my whole goal is not to convince, like Paul says in Galatians chapter 1, I'm not trying to convince, am I trying to convince God or man? I'm not trying to convince God of nothing. No. I can't change his mind. I'm trying to convince you that God is telling you the truth. You see, that's the only way. I'm not trying to please man. Paul said, if I try to please man, I would no longer be the servant of Jesus Christ. So I'm trying to please God. And I'm saying that just so you understand, my whole goal is not to prove anybody wrong, not to hurt anybody's feelings. My whole goal is to prove God right, so you know for sure that what you're doing and what you're saying is pleasing to God. Because we never want to find ourselves against God. You're not stronger than God, you're not going to win that. You can't talk God into anything. And many times we try to find ways to find ways around certain things instead of accepting what God has said. Now, I started off this way. A good friend of mine who's also an evangelist, we were having a conversation about a subject, And I'll talk about that subject next week. But he said something to me. He said the only thing that God said concerning idolatry is do not bow down to other gods. Now, I said that is not the only thing that God said. Okay? So like Paul says, he says in Romans chapter 15 that things written aforetime written for our learning. In other words, when we can go back and we look at how God treated things in the past, look at what was actually said in the old law, look at what was said in the New Testament about a subject, and then when we see that there's a lot of subjects that you have to go back and see what the definition of was before to even understand what's actually being said in the New Testament. And that's why those references are being made. You know, for example, you know, we're gonna talk about this today in the sermon today. You know, like when Peter was actually says, as in the days of Noah, that is, 8 souls were saved by water. So the baptism also now save us, not to put away the filth of the flesh, but an answer with good conscience toward God. The only way you can understand what Peter was trying to make, the reference Peter was trying to make to salvation in water, you have to go back to that Old Testament story to understand that story, to get it. So there's certain things you have to go back to get in the old law to get the definition of when God defined a term, and that way we can understand what's really being said here. So, many times we think to ourselves when idolatry is spoken, we have friends and we have family members who actually go to places that will actually have statues, that they'll actually bow down in front of a statue. And we say, well, that's idolatry. That truly is idolatry. But that's not the only thing idolatry is. So y'all ready? Yes. All right, so it's going to be a lot of reading. Who here by show of hands, and just by show of hands, I'm only going to embarrass you this one time. Who here is not wanting to read today? That way I won't call on. Okay, that means everybody else is ready to read. So everybody be ready, because I'm going to give everybody a verse. So see, we're going to be starting off Exodus chapter 20. Now this is one of the verses that we all know. Here it is that God is actually giving his written word to his people, to Israel at this time. And this is what we call the Decalogue, or the 10 Commandments. Now keep in mind, I was told by a good friend of mine, and I'm going to get back on camera, Jim. I hope they can still hear me, because Jim always says you walk away from the camera. But I got to, let me get back on camera here. For those who don't know, we started to put all these things online on YouTube, so you can go back and read these, hear these videos. Now, so his argument was the only thing that God said about idolatry is do not bow down. Okay? So let's look when God starts defining to his people Israel at this time about idolatry. Now this is him addressing it in writing now. Now keep in mind, it was wrong to worship any other God even before Moses went up on Mount Sinai. But now it's being put in writing, okay? Just so they can understand it. And so in verse number 1 and 2, I'm going to read that, and I'm going to have Cecilia start reading. It says, and God spake all these words, saying, who said this? God. Did Moses say this? No. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord God, the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Start reading, Cecilia.
Thou shalt not have other gods before me.
So he said, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So I'm going to ask you a quick question. Does that mean, is he saying then that you can have other gods as long as I'm first? Or is he saying no gods?
No gods.
No gods. No other gods. So the one thing is, he says, no other gods. Keep reading, Cecilia.
Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth.
Okay, so he says, do not make other gods. Go ahead, keep reading, Cecilia.
Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers after the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me.
All righty, he says, do not bow down and do not serve. So here's the thing. Did God just say do not bow? No, he says do not make, do not bow, and do not serve. But let me make sure, I want to say here, I actually skipped one here. I skipped something. Because there's one before that. He says, do not have. Did we see that?
Yes.
He said, thou shalt have no other God before me.
Yes.
So, do not have. Do not serve. All right? We also see, if you would now jump down, Joy, to verse number 23 of Exodus chapter 20. And what does the Bible say?
Ye shall not make with me gods of silver, neither shall you make unto gods.
In other words, so first of all, he tells them, do not have, do not make, do not bow, do not serve. Yeah, but what if we make it out of something that's really, really valuable? No, don't make it out of silver, don't make it out of gold. You see that?
Yes.
All right. Chapter 23, and in verse number 13. Sister Jones?
Now concerning everything which I have said to you, be on your guard, and do not mention the name of other gods, nor let them be heard from your mouth.
Now, just to put this in context, if you back up just a verse before that, it says, 6 days thou shalt do thy work, and on the 7th day thou shalt rest, and thine ox and thine ass may rest, and the son of thy handmaid and stranger may be refreshed. And in all things that I have said unto thee, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of their mouth. 3 times thou shalt keep a feast unto me in a year. So what he's saying is, he's going to explain it. Inside my solemn feast, I don't even want you to mention the name of another god. Now, y'all realize they had solemn feasts that were dedicated to Christ, to God at that time. And he's saying in those, see, they could talk about other gods because they warned each other against other gods. But he said, inside my solemn feast, don't even mention the name of another god. That's going to be important that we catch that. Because he's saying, when you're worshiping me, do not mention the name of another god. All right. Now, Sister Parker, in the same chapter, I want you to read verse number 24.
24. You shall not bow down to their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but you shall utterly overthrow them and completely break down their sacred pillars.
And so here he is. He's actually warning his people when his people are being taken out of bondage and they've been passing through the lands of these other people. And he says, for mine angel, verse 23, shall go before thee and bring thee unto the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I will cut them off. And thou shalt not bow down to their gods. In other words, when you're going through the land of these people, you do not take on the customs and the gods of these people. But when it comes down to when they're in an area that you have to dwell in, you tear those things down. You get rid of it. You don't integrate in. Okay? So in other words, do not serve the gods of other people. So this is one of the things that he's talking about, because I know a lot of times, and see here's and I'm gonna get to my point here. I'm gonna give you an answer here. I'm gonna give you I'll tell you where I'm gonna be going with this later on. Many times when we're talking about idolatrous behavior, we'll say, well, you know, that was a custom of my people. Okay? And we're going to see later on that even in the New Testament, the customs of the people is what they were told not to do anymore because it was idolatrous. Okay? So my point is, in other words, just because you're in a land does not, and I'm using this from the time of Israel at that time, just because you're in that land does not mean you're of that land. You do not take on the customs of the people inside that land. You do not worship their gods, and you do not pay homage to their gods. Okay? Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse number 25. I think it's Brother Charles.
Cursed be he that taketh reward.
Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse number 25. 7 and verse number 25.
Oh, I thought you said 27.
No, 7 and verse number 25. Although that's a very good verse too, but that's not what we're going to go with that today. We'll tie that in later on. Deuteronomy 7 verse 25.
Okay. grave
Images.
images of their God shall ye burn with fire. Thou shalt not desire the silver or gold that is on them, nor take it unto thee. Lost thou, lest thou be smeared.
There they're in. You're almost there.
Smeared therein, for it is an abomination to the Lord thy God.
So here it is. Let's think about it for a second. So keep in mind, Israel is going through conquest at this time, and they're going into and possessing lands, and they're coming upon places where they're like, people have their other statues than their gods. And God says, you do not serve them, you don't make them. Matter of fact, you destroy these images. Don't even desire the silver or the gold, okay? Do not. Now, keep in mind, when you go back and you read back a little bit further, you realize he's saying you cannot worship these gods. Don't even desire the silver and gold. In other words, you want nothing to do with these things. God is saying you want nothing to, you don't want to be influenced by these gods in any way, monetarily or to worship them or nothing. Leave it alone altogether. Here's the next point that I want to make sure we catch. Pam, read verse 26 of the same chapter.
Neither shalt thou bring an abomination into thy house, lest thou be accursed, thing like it, but thou shalt utterly detest it, and thou shalt utterly abhor it, for it is a cursed thing.
So here's what God told his people, okay? Again and again, he's telling them to destroy these things, have nothing to do with it. But he goes on and says, do not bring this into your house. God said it's an abomination. Who knows what abomination means? What does it mean?
It's terrible,
Terrible.
not good.
Terrible, not good, but it gets a little bit deeper than that.
It's sickening.
It's sickening. The word abomination means it's sickening. It disgusts. It's disgusting. In other words, when something is called, not everything in the Bible is called abomination. But when you see God use the word abomination, it's saying it disgusts him. It is disgusting to him. Okay? It is sickening to him. He's using the word to help us understand. There are certain things that we hate, right? There are certain things we don't like. There are certain things we don't feel good about. And then there are certain things just totally disgust you, right? And when he uses abomination, that's a very heavy word because he does not use that always. But when it comes down to idols and idolatry, he said it's an abomination. It is disgusting. And he said, do not bring anything that disgusts God, this idols or idolatry, into your house. Because if you bring it into your house, you are now cursed just like that item is cursed. Oh, it's going to get deep here in a second. So he says, do not bring it into your house. My writing's bad. Do not bring it into your house. Okay? Alrighty. Deuteronomy chapter 11 and verse number 16. Go ahead, Laura.
Take heed to yourselves that your heart be not deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them.
Alrighty, so take heed means, anytime you see take heed, you need to slow down and pay attention. He said, pay attention now. I'm saying, pay attention. And what he's saying is, don't be tricked into worshiping other gods. Sometimes you may not be doing it on purpose, but don't be deceived. Do not be deceived into serving other gods. You know, and here's where I think many of us in the United States fallen today, we've been deceived into something. Do not be deceived. Because what you have to understand is that, what does it mean? It means to deceive means to be tricked. But you have to understand, even when you go back and you look at this particular chapter, even if you were tricked, you still paid for it. Because it was a way for you to know what God said. If you know what God says, then you shouldn't be tricked. But a lot of times we allow what we feel, our heart, to be tricked because there's something that we want. But God says you should not be doing that. And so he said, do not be tricked into it. Okay? Do not be deceived. Deuteronomy chapter 12 and verse number 30.
Take heed to thyself that thou not be snared by following them. After that they be destroyed from before there, and that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise.
So in other words, he said, take heed to thyself that thou be not snared. What is a snare?
Right.
Don't be trapped.
Right.
And we need to understand something here. That idolatry is a trap. Because he said, do not be snared. So you understand it is a trap now. We're going to see, it's going to make sense later on. Don't be trapped. Now here's an important one that we need to catch. Because God covered something here. He says, do not be deceived and do not be snared. He says, and do not, and because what's going to happen is that they're going to be destroyed and everything. And he says, and thou shalt not inquire after their gods. Don't ask their gods for anything. As a matter of fact, don't even ask and try to figure out how these people serve their gods. Huh? Don't even worry about it. You don't even know how these people serve their gods. Who do we need to know how to serve? Jehovah God, right? And here's why he said, he told why he says, do not try to learn how they did it. Because what he's saying is like, if we're saying that, he's saying that these are people, the God's people. And he's saying we serve Jehovah God. And see, he's saying that if you go and ask how they're serving their gods, you might get the idea to try to do the same thing for me. And give to me what these other people are giving to their gods. Now that's important that we catch this. Because the very next verse, read that, Brother McClary, verse 31.
Thou shalt not do so unto the Lord thy God, for every abomination to the Lord which he hated have they done unto their God, even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their God.
And whatsoever thing and what things soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto nor diminish from it. Now, here's the point. So he's saying, do not go and inquire how they serve their gods, because then you might try to come and do that for me. He says, do not offer to me what they offer to their gods. Now, I'm going to make sure y'all understand why this is important. I need to stop for a second. Because a lot of times we think to ourselves that even though we know something did not have a beginning, an honest beginning, had a beginning where we'll say something was pagan, right? We use the word pagan. Now the word pagan is not in the scriptures. Y'all know that, don't you? Just so we get that. And many times we say, well, we know something had pagan beginnings, but that's not what it means to me. And we're doing it for a different reason. Let me make sure you understand something before you ever make that statement, that I'm not doing it for that pagan God no more. I'm doing it for Jehovah God. Jehovah God says, do not offer to me what they offer to their God. You do not do that, because it is an abomination for what they do for their God. So do not offer me something abominable. One of the things I try to explain is that sometimes we try to justify an activity that we like to do and say we're doing it for God. And God says, do not offer me what they offered their God. It is an abomination. And we think because we like it that it's okay. And I use an abomination. Here's my definition of abomination to help us understand when we hear the word abomination. You see, let's say for example, Jim, I bring something to you and I got this, and I'm going to be very graphic here. I got this pile of poop, dog poop, right? I'm like, here, Jim, there you go. He's like, what in the world? Why would you offer me something how so disgusting? I said, wait a minute, Jim, wait a minute, I got it. And I take it, I get that pile of dog poop, and I put all this frosting and whipped cream on it and say, there you go, Jim. Do you want it, Jim? No. Because under all the frosting and all the poop and the bow and the decoration, it's still poop. Yeah. You see my point? We need to make sure we stop trying to frost stuff that God says is disgusting. This is what he was warning his people about. Now, I haven't even made my point yet, but y'all see where I'm going with this. You see, God covered all. There's no loopholes at all here. As a matter of fact, he even says that do not do this because these people sacrifice their own children. Let me help you understand something here. Even if you're saying, I don't really want to do it, but I'm doing it for my children. No, you do not sacrifice your children to other gods. God covered every base here. All right? Let's keep going. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 13. Here's going to be one. Y'all know sometimes when we find ourselves as children of God having issue where we're trying to do what God tells us to do, but we also got family we're trying to take care of and please also, right? Yes. Right? Yes. God actually addressed this issue even back in that day. Now, granted, it's not as dire today. It still is dire today, but back then it was a big issue. So let's look at what he says here in Deuteronomy chapter 13 and in verse number 6. Samuel?
If thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or thy wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is thine own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast known, thou nor thy father.
Keep reading.
Or not known. Namely, of the gods of the people which are round about thee, nigh unto thee, or far off from thee, from the one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth.
Read verse number 8, the very first part of it.
Thou shalt not consent.
So let's make sure we understand here before we get any further. He says that when it comes down to it, he said, even if it's your own family, those ones closest to you, if they're using that leverage of their relationship with you to, even though you know it's wrong, and they knew, Israel knew it's wrong to do these things, ain't nobody gonna know, let's just do this our own thing, do it secretly. You know, he made it very, very plain. I don't care who they are. I don't care where you got this from. Whether it's from the people that are round about you, just to show you how far I'm not going to let you go from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. It is not going to be acceptable to me. Don't consent no matter who it is and no matter where it came from. Do not consent. Now, y'all know there's been many times when we know that there's things that we need to be doing that God said is right. And many times family would come into town and talk us into doing something else. Let's just use something very simple. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Y'all know this ain't even my lesson, but I'm going to give this one to you for free. Okay? Y'all know this, how family can be. Right? You're not expecting them. Somebody comes into town and it's like 5 minutes before you're supposed to be at the worship service, and then the friends come into town and everything, and you end up staying there. Now, that used to happen to me back many, many years ago. But you know what happens now? Somebody comes to my house 5 minutes before worship service starts. Either you can get in the car and come with me, or you can wait here till I get back, because I'm not staying here. Yeah. And family knows that, don't they? They know that. Yeah. No matter where we are, they know that. Yeah. And so when we understand that idea, that we do not allow family to influence us or stop us from doing what God tells us to do, but also encouraging us to do things we should never be doing. And this is how he's defining idolatry. No matter where you got, don't let them talk into it secretly. And just to show you how God felt about it, he goes on and says, verse number 8, he says, thou shalt not consent unto him, nor hearken unto him, neither shalt thou eye pity him, neither shalt thou spare, neither shalt thou conceal him, but thou shalt surely kill him. Ooh, how did God feel about it? Yeah. Aren't you glad we don't actually have to do that today? Yeah. He said, thou shalt surely kill him. Thine hand shall be the first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hands of all the people. Y'all do realize he just listed family members. Yeah. He's saying, in other words, it disgusts God so much, he's saying that if your own close family did it, you need to be the first one. Don't pity them. You need to be the first one to stone them. How did God feel about idolatry at that time? It was serious. It was serious. And that's the thing. When you start understanding what he's saying, and he says, and in verse 10, that thou shalt stone him with stones, that he die. Because he has sought the trust, he hath sought to thrust thee away from the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. Okay? And all Israel shall hear and fear, and they shall do no more any such wickedness as this is among you. So again, God spoke very, very harshly about these things. Deuteronomy chapter 29, and in verse number 17. Are we ready? You're up.
What, me?
Yes, you're up.
Then I and took two tablets, is that the
Deuteronomy 29, verse number 17.
And you saw their abominations and their idols which were among them, wood and stone and silver and gold.
Now, when he's talking, he's reminding them of the days that he took them out of Egypt. And he says in verse number 16, for you know how we have dwelt in the land of Egypt, and how we came through the nations which we passed by. And you have seen their abominations, and their idols, and their wood, and their stone, their silver, and their gold, which were among them. And he goes and said, lest there should be any among you, man, or woman, or family, or tribe, whose heart turneth away from this day from the Lord your God, to go serve other gods or other nations, lest there should be among you a root that beareth gall and wormwood. And it come to pass, that he heard the words of this curse, and he blessed himself in his heart, saying, I shall have peace, though I walk in the imagination of mine heart, to add drunkenness to thirst. The Lord will not spare him. So let's make sure you understand it. You've seen it. He's reminding, you've seen these things. Not only did you see these things in the land of you're in, you saw these things in Egypt. Y'all know, and this is another thing we have to bring up. Y'all remember the story when children of Israel had been in Egyptian bondage over 400 years, right? And God has finally had to deliver them out. And he delivers them out without them ever lifting a hand to fight on their own. And they looted Egypt. They took all the stuff out of Egypt and everything, right? Yeah. Now here's the thing. Once they got into the wilderness and Moses went up on Mount Sinai, right? And while Moses was on Mount Sinai, the people got together, they got Aaron, and they got all the gold together, and they fashioned a golden calf and said, this God shall go before us, because this is the God that brought us out of Egypt. Now you thought yourself, like, how in the world could they ever come to that conclusion that when Jehovah God brought them out of Egypt, that they actually made this golden calf and to go out before them and say, we don't know what happened to Moses, but this is the God that brought us out of Egypt. Now, here's the point I need to help us understand here. You may not think you understand why they would ever do that, but it makes sense why they did it. And I'm going to tell you why. Do you know when God actually took them out of Egyptian bondage, from the place that he took them from to where he was taking them to, why did God take 40 years to deliver them there? He wouldn't have taken 40 years to get there. They could to test them what? Whether they're going to follow his name, his word, or no. What's that?
To take Egypt out of them.
That's the problem. You see, the problem was not getting them out of Egypt. The problem was getting Egypt out of them. They still had been bombarded with the gods of Egypt. And so being in there for 400 years and generation to generation seeing these Egyptian gods, and they're in bondage to these people all these years. So they knew about the gods of Egypt. They also recognized the gods of the lands that God passed them through. But what happens is that they were holding on to ideas and teachings and traditions that God had to get out of their mind. Because here it is, God has taken them out of Egyptian bondage without them ever lifting a finger to fight on their own. They walked out. They didn't even run. They walked out, took all the wealth of Egypt with them. And once they get out into the wilderness, they want to pay homage to the God of Egypt that God just rescued them from. Now y'all do realize that, think about this for a second. When we look at all the different plagues that God sent up on Egypt, and how that he sent these plagues upon Egypt, but his people were not affected by it. Why do you think God did that before he delivered them out of Egypt? Exodus chapter 12 lets us know that. Yeah, what he was doing, see, what you have to understand, the Nile River was a god to them. And so when God actually turned into blood, he's like, where's your God now? You understand that the sun was a god to them. And he made it so pitch black that lovers couldn't even find a kiss. That's how dark he said it was. Lovers could not even find each other's lips in the dark. I can close my eyes and find a kiss pretty good myself. But it was so dark. That's how dark it was. In other words, when he made it dark over all of Egypt, he was saying, where is your God? When you understand that they had a God that looked over their crops, and he just destroyed their crops with locusts, where's your God? When you understand that the frog was actually a deity, considered a deity, it was a federal offense in Egypt to step on a frog, but he caused so many frogs to come up out of the Nile River that you could not walk at God. Which makes it more amazing when God publicly challenged the gods of Egypt. Not so Egypt would know, but so his people would know who the true God is. And they finally get out and get delivered. And they want to make a golden calf to themselves. Holding on to something that God just delivered them from. It'd be funny if it wasn't so tragic. And it'd be funny if it wasn't so tragic that we do the exact same thing today. So we've seen these abominations. They knew how God felt about it. And he still have to correct them over these things. Who did this include? 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verse number 26. Just to show you what is God including in this? Okay, in idolatry. 1 Chronicles chapter 16, and in verse number 26. This is actually a time when we see David actually wrote this more than one time. This is actually during the time of a song that David actually sang this. But we're going to see David said the exact same thing in Psalm 106 and verse number 36. But, Psalms number 96, verse number 5. 1 Chronicles chapter 16 and verse number 26. What does the Bible say, sister?
For all the gods of the peoples are idols, but the Lord made the heavens.
Okay, so which gods of the people is God leaving out? Did he say some of the gods of the people are idols, or all the gods of the people are idols? Is there any god of the people that God is not including in idolatry? Is there any that he's overlooking? So he actually says that all of the gods of the people are idols. You see, a lot of times, he said the same thing in Psalm 96, verse 5, for all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Just so we understand how many gods are including in this, he said all. So in other words, many times we'll say things like pagan. What if it's a pagan god? All. What if it's a Celtic god? All. What if it's an African god? All. An Asian god? All. All of the gods of the people are idols. He's including every other god that is not him in idolatry. Did I say that? Did he say that?
He said.
Just want to make sure we understand what's included. So Psalm 106, and I'm going to read this for lack of time, and I'm going to take us into the New Testament here in a second. Here it is, backing up in verse number 28, it says, and they joined themselves also to Baal Peor, and ate the sacrifices of the dead. And they provoked him to anger with their inventions. And the plague raked in upon them. Then stood up Phinehas and executed judgment. And so the plague was stayed. And that was counted unto him for righteousness unto all generations forevermore. They angered him also at the water of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes, because they provoked his spirit, so that he spake unadvisedly with his lips. And they did not destroy the nations concerning whom the Lord commanded them, but were mingled among the heathen, and learned their works, and they served their idols, which were a snare unto them. Yea, they sacrificed their sons and their daughters unto devils. Now, we need to make sure we understand what he just said here, because I want to make sure we tying in how God feels about idolatry and where idolatry does come from. All right? So, we're going to get ourselves here to the New Testament now. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning at verse number 1, we're going to tie in how Paul used the story about the children of Israel being given instructions after they're taken out of Egyptian bondage to try to teach the church some things concerning wanting and going after the wrong things. Okay? 1 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning in verse number 1. Verse number 1. And I'm going to read for lack of time for the rest of that morning. It says, moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat that same spiritual meat, and did all drink that same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with many of them, God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. So let's get this straight. So he's painting this picture, and keep in mind, this is a warning that he's given to the church at Corinth, and to us also. So he paints this picture of how that all of the people that were being willing to be obedient to God, and to take that lamb without spot and without blemish on the 10th day, and take it up, keep it up until the 14th day, and kill it in the evening time, and then eat it with their clothes on, ready to go. Everybody who followed those instructions put the blood over their door, and when the angel of death, the angel came by, he was going to pass over because they saw the blood, and then they walked out of Egypt, right? And so he reminds them that they were all blessed by God to be delivered from a condition they could not get themselves out of. And then once they were delivered out of Egypt and they were in the wilderness, and even after they'd been delivered, their sin or Egypt still followed them. And so what happened was God parted the sea, and they walked over on dry ground. And they had water in a liquid form on the right, water in liquid form on the left, had a cloud above them. So they were baptized in the Red Sea and in Moses. And so they had benefited from everything that God had did. God had truly blessed them. He had delivered them from their bondage, and he also delivered them from their bondage. Their sin continued to follow them. And yet, even with all those blessings, God was still not well pleased, because many of them died. Most of them died in the wilderness. And he's using this example to warn Christians. Let me make sure you understand something here. See, God is faithful. There was a time when we were in bondage of sin, right? And we could not deliver ourselves out. If we could have delivered ourselves out, we wouldn't have been in sin all our lives until we got to that point, right? And we were delivered the same way with that lamb without spot and without blemish, Jesus Christ himself, before the foundation of the world. Not by silver or gold, but by a lamb without spot and without blemish, who was foreordained before the foundation of the world. That's how we were delivered. And so, when you understand that, he's given a warning that even though you benefited by being delivered from the bondage of sin, and that you still have access to that same blood daily to be delivered from even sin following you anymore, you can still find yourself in a place lost in the wilderness. Because when we were saved, when we became children of God, God didn't take us to heaven right away. That's the promised land. You realize we're in the wilderness right now to see whether or not we're going to follow him or not. And so he's making this warning to children of God, people that are called by God's name. They were called Israel. The E-L on that is God's name. We're called after Christ, God, the Son. He's warning us. People that are called by his name. And notice what he says here. He says, but verse 5, but with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our example, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as many of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. I will show us what really was happening with some of those things that they were actually doing in those days. And you're going to be shocked, because sometimes we do the exact same things. And he goes on and says, neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 320,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyed. What does murmur mean? Complaining against doing what God said. Complaining, because you don't want to do what God said do, right? And were destroyed of the destroyer. Now these things happen unto them for examples. In other words, the reason that happened to them at that time is so that God's people at that time would not want things they should not be wanting. But it goes on and says, it was written to them for examples. And they are written for our admonition. What is an admonition? It's more than an instruction. It's a warning. It's an instruction with a warning. An admonition is a warning. So it's written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Therefore, let him think that he stand, and take heed lest he fall. If you think that you're standing strong before God and you got everything covered, you need to pay attention to this. Because these people were called by God's name. They believed that God was real. They believed that God was powerful. Yet they still died in the wilderness. You know why? Because they did not believe what God was saying. They were still counted. Hebrews chapter 3. You can believe who God is because he has a name on you and all of those things. But if you don't believe what he's saying, you're still counted as a non-believer. See, that was the issue. They knew that God was real. They got a chance to see firsthand his power. But they didn't believe what he was saying. And he says, therefore let him that thinketh he stand take heed lest he fall. And here is the context of this verse that everybody likes to quote, but never understands what the verse was talking about. He says, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you're able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. Wherefore, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry. What temptation is God talking about? What is he talking about? Idolatry. We use that verse for everything else except what that verse is used for. We're talking about, man, I get tempted by these men or these women or whatever else like that. But I realize that God's not going to allow me to be tempted above which I can bear. That's not even what he's talking about. He's talking about idolatry. Idolatry before it, and he summed it up. Wherefore, my beloved brother, flee from idolatry. What is he saying that God is faithful to make an escape from? Idolatry. He is faithful. He will make it possible for you always to escape. And the sad part about it is many times we're not looking for the escape. We're looking how to bring it in. God is faithful to make an escape. He makes it possible for us. He gives us a way no matter how weak we may think we are. He makes it possible. He gives us a way to escape making it. Gives us a way to escape of bowing down or having it or serving it or mentioning it or bringing it into our house or being deceived by it or being trapped by it. He makes it a way of escape. You know why? Because he is faithful, no doubt. We just need to stop making excuses while we don't understand it.
Amen.
Last thing, I'm going to leave here tonight. We're going to talk about it a little bit more beginning next week. But it's interesting. In Acts chapter 15, now y'all do realize there was a time when the apostles were going to Jerusalem, Judea, to Jews, right? And Paul was actually sent out to the Gentiles, right? And so finally a subject came up about whether or not the Gentiles need to be circumcised to be coming to the Commonwealth. And so they all decided to come back and have this rally in Jerusalem, right? And so Paul had been preaching for like 17 years at that time. In other words, he had never even met the apostles yet. But he'd been preaching 17 years. All these other places. And finally he gets a chance to meet with Peter. What's interesting is when he meets with Peter, he realized that he and Peter were saying the exact same thing. And that's why he offered him the right hand of fellowship. We're saying the same thing. And so Peter just gives him instructions. Okay, here's the thing. Don't try to bind any circumcision on the Gentiles. You don't do that. That's stuff we couldn't even keep ourselves, right? But he gives him some instructions. And notice what he says here, beginning in verse 19. So here's his summation. He says, wherefore my sentence is that we trouble them not, which from among the Gentiles are turned to God. In other words, we don't try to get them to do things like circumcision or that. We won't trouble them. But notice what he says here. But that we write unto them that they abstain from pollution of idols, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood. If we jump down to a few verses, we see the same thing again. He says in verse 28, he says, for it seemed good to the Holy Ghost and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things, that you abstain from meat offered to idols, and from blood, and from things strangled, and from fornication. For which if you keep yourselves, you shall do well, fare ye well. So here you have to understand, he gave them instructions. Okay, you don't try to bind all these things from the law of Moses on Gentiles. You couldn't keep it ourselves. Because we already had that study that the law did, which showed you you're a sinner. It didn't fix what's going on with you. But they're under grace and truth now. But he says, notice what he says. He told them, but you do teach them this. To keep themselves from being polluted by idols. Now you do realize that the Gentiles served other gods. That was part of their culture. When we look at Acts chapter 17, when Paul goes in and he goes into the Greek province, and he was overcome because the whole city was given over to idolatry. Just given over. It bothered him. So you understand that someone's teaching, as far as their gods are concerned, that is rooted in their culture. And the only thing he told them is, like, we're not going to try to bind circumcision and stuff like that on you, but you do need to teach them to abstain and keep themselves from being polluted by idols. So was he giving them permission to follow their gods in any other way?
No.
Their traditions? No. You see, what we have to understand is that we don't see things the same way that they saw it. If we go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul was summarizing this whole thing up. And notice what he says here. He says, verse number 14, wherefore, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry. He said, I speak as to wise men, judge ye what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? For we being many are one bread and one body, and we are all partakers of that one bread. Behold, Israel after the flesh, are not they which eat of the sacrifice partakers of the altar? What say I then, that an idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idol is anything? But I say the thing that which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to what? Yeah. Devils, and not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with devils. You cannot drink of the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and the table of devils. Do you provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? You know who's going to win this fight? Not you. So notice this. I know a lot of times things that we call traditions. Think about the things that we call worship. We sing to God, right? We pray to God, right? We actually have a solemn feast to God, right? We do all of these things. Do you realize that other gods actually have days and solemn feasts and all kinds of things also? And what he's saying is, you cannot eat at the table of the Lord and the table of devils. We say pagan, he said devils. He said devils in the psalm, he said devils now. And what we need to understand is, when you understand that when idolatry is not based in anything God has said, idolatry is based in Satan. It's satanic.
Yeah.
It sounds different when you say it that way, doesn't it? All of their rituals, they don't do it to God. They do it to devils. And it's going to make sense because you start seeing the doctrines of devils. All of these things. You see things like sons of Belial. Anybody know who Belial is? It's a chief demon. But I'm trying to get us to understand that God spells it out. But a lot of times we think to ourselves, well, it don't mean that to me. But what does it mean to God? I don't feel that way. But how does God feel about it? You know, depending on where you go in the world, there's certain things that we can do differently in the parts of the world that it means different things. You know, for example, if I go like this, what does that mean here? Good job, right? You know, in other parts of the world, that means the same thing as the middle finger to somebody. Now, what if you go to that part of the world and you go like this? And they get all mad at you and they're ready to fight. And you say like, well, wait a minute, you know? And they're mad at you, like, how dare you say that to me? They're ready to fight. You're like, but hey, but that ain't what it means to me. Like, who cares what it means to you? You about to get hit. What does it mean to the person you gave it to? When it comes down to how we feel about things that God calls idolatry, we can't put enough frosting on it to make it taste good to God. He says it's an abomination. So what we're going to do next week, we're going to start making practical application. Because you know, too many times we'll say something like, well, I know that it had pagan beginnings, but you see, God didn't say pagan one time. What do we know? He said all of the gods of the people are idols. That's what God said. That ain't even what Hal said. See, I didn't even read it all. I'll let you guys read it. So we want to make sure we understand that as we start putting the rubber to the road next week, I want you to make sure that you're upset at somebody, that you're not upset at me. Because I'm going to have you read it. And then also what I want you to do, who actually has a phone, a Bible app on their phone? One when you can do a word search on it. Just to see if I told you the truth. Sometime between now and next week, I want you to do a word search for the word idol, I-D-O-L, just that one time, and then count the verses. Then I want you to do the word search for gods, G-O-D-S, and do a count of the verses. Then I want you to do a word search of just the God, Baal, B-A-A-L, and then count the verses. Then I want you to try to figure out any other subject in the Bible that you can find more verses for. Because it's amazing that the one subject that God has been dealing with ever since man began, the one thing he talked about the absolute most that he warned about more than any other thing is the one subject that we never talk about. I want you to see it yourself, what God has actually said. Old Testament, patriarchal age, Old Testament, and New Testament. I think you're going to be floored. Any questions, any comments where we're going with this next week? All right, let's all pray together. Most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for all the many blessings that you've given us, but especially for your Son and his precious gospel. And Father, we're also thankful for this word that's been delivered to us, Father, so that we can know for sure that we're pleasing to you, but also know where our soul stands with you at any given time, Father. So, Father, we ask you to forgive us when we fall short. Forgive us when we fall short out of ignorance, Father. But pray that we'll always be ready to strive and ready to see with our eyes and hear with our ears and understand with our mind. And just as important, receive with our heart this word, which is, when taken in, is able to save our souls, Father. But Father, not just keep it within ourselves, but we use as that good seed that's being spread by the Son of Man, that we can actually take this word out to a lost and dying world, that we can speak these things so that other folks can come to know you before it's everlasting too late, Father. And so, Father, we ask your blessings on our time and our effort. We ask these blessings in Jesus' name. Amen.